Hello there and welcome to my guide for painting the Laughing Prince Adam from Masters of the Universe Battleground. So the first thing I've done is sprayed in with some matte white spray from Colourforge. I'm then going to start work on his boots and his loincloth, and I'm going to use some Gene Stealer purple. I'm then going to use Warp Fiend grey for his leggings. Next, I'll use some Druchii Violet just to add a little bit of shading to the loincloth and the boots. I'll also do it around the rims of the leggings. Make sure you don't use too much though, as we don't want that purple to be too deep. Once that wash is dried, we're then going to reuse the Gene Stealer purple. We're going to dry brush it onto the loincloth, but we're going to paint it by hand on the boots, making sure we avoid any of the recesses. Then we'll do the same, but this time it's going to be a 50-50 mix of Gene Stealer purple and matte white for the highlight. Don't forget dry brush for the loincloth and normal paint for the boots. And then one final highlight on the boots of that same mix, but at a 70-30 ratio in favour of matte white. Then we're going to relayer the Warp Fiend grey, making sure we avoid any of the recesses. And this will be followed by a highlight of a 50-50 mix of Warp Fiend grey and Slaanesh grey. Moving on to his shirt, we're going to use some Emperor's Children. And we'll highlight that with a 50-50 mix of Emperor's Children and Fulgrim Pink. And this will be followed by an edge highlight of Fulgrim Pink just by itself. For his white undershirt, we're going to use some Grey Seer as a base coat. This will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Grey Seer and matte white. And then finally, matte white just by itself for the final highlight. Next, I'm going to paint his skin with some Bugman's Glow. And that will receive a wash with some Reichland Flesh Shade. While that dries, I'm going to paint his belt with some Abaddon Black. And I'll give it a highlight with some Corvus Black. Then for his buckle, I'm going to paint that with some Retributor Armor. Going back to his skin, I'm going to use a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone for the first highlight. But before I go any further, I'm going to paint his eyes with some Abaddon Black. I'm just going to do the slits as because they are closed. I'm then going to use a little bit of matte white to paint his teeth. I'm then going to use Cadian Flesh Tone just by itself to continue painting his skin. And this will be followed by a 50-50 mix of Cadian Flesh Tone and Kislev Flesh. And then finally, Kislev Flesh just by itself on the absolute peaks and tips. For the handle of his sword, I'm going to use some Screamer Pink. And for the bottom of the hilt, I'm going to use some Retributor Armor. I'll then use a little bit of Reichland Flesh Shade for the bottom of that sword along with his belt buckle. Next, I'm going to use Xandri Dust to paint his hair, which we're going to wash with some Army Painter Soft Tone. I'm then going to use Mournfang Brown to paint the base or the muddy areas on the base, which I'll highlight with some Scrag Brown. Next, I'll paint the sword with some Iron Hands Steel, which I'll wash with some Nuln Oil. While that dries, and for the rocks that he's standing on, I'm going to use some Dawnstone, which I'll highlight with some Grey Seer. For the plants that are sticking out, they're going to get painted with some Deathworld Forest. And they'll be highlighted with a 50-50 mix of Deathworld Forest and matte white. Then moving back to the sword, we're going to use a 50-50 mix of Iron Hands Steel and Stormhost Silver for the highlight. And this will be followed by Stormhost Silver just by itself. Next, to paint the rest of the base, I'm going to use Abaddon Black. And then finally, the entire base will be washed with some watered down Agrax Earthshade. And once that shade is dried, that's Prince Adam finished. And I have to say, he's been an absolute splendid blast to paint. The only complaint I do have is that basically he took too quick. I didn't have enough time really to enjoy myself because he only took about 2 hours and 10 minutes to be precise. And every step of it, like I said, was an absolute blast. He also comes from a game that really needs more love. It's Masters of the Universe Battleground. It's a fantastic little skirmish game by Archon Studios. And I wholeheartedly recommend getting it. There are going to be more videos like this on the channel. So if you want to see those, give the channel a subscribe. And, well, I'll see you next time. Goodbye for now.